Today we're diving deep on Dow component Merck's second quarter results and taking a look at anything else investors may want to know about the big pharma. This is your market checkup. Now, Max, Merck had a bit of a mixed second quarter. They beat on the bottom line. Earnings per share were pretty good. Unfortunately, the top line was not. Revenue missed expectations and actually declined 11% year over year. They also lowered revenue guidance 2%, which may not sound like a lot, but when you have the amount of revenue Merck does, it was about a $900 million reduction, which is significant. The company also announced that it was lowering R&D spending beneath 2012 levels, but what did you see that worked for Merck in the quarter?
Well, I saw some impressive growth with Gardasil, which is the company's HPV vaccine. Sales grew 18%. It's on track for blockbuster status again this year, and it's really competing only against GlaxoSmithKline's Cervarix, which brought in $71 million last quarter. So it seems like Merck is really cementing its place as the dominant product in this area.
I definitely think it is, and there's been a big push, a broad push by health officials to get these drugs, these vaccines used. I know they're a bit controversial still, but over time that should help. That should be a good tailwind for these products.
Right. Also, Nasonex, another blockbuster drug, sales grew 11%. So it looks like that very charming bee in the commercials worked its magic. Diabetes franchise also grew. Januvia grew 1%, topped $1 billion. Janumet sales grew 16%. And they're facing direct competition from Onglyza, which is in the same drug class and is produced by Bristol Myers Squibb and AstraZeneca. This drug had kind of a slow launch, but it's starting to pick up steam, and it brought in $240 million last quarter. That's a 40% bump year over year. So while Januvia and Janumet continue to be the top sellers in this space, they are facing a little bit of competition from Onglyza.
Yeah, and when I was looking at it, I thought China was a bit of a bright spot. It had double-digit growth, and emerging markets are incredibly important to the company. 22% of pharmaceutical sales comes from emerging markets, and China really is the growth driver behind that. But I think investors do need to be a little concerned about what's happening there in a macro sense. GlaxoSmithKline has gotten all the heat and bad press over an alleged $500 million bribery scheme, but the Chinese government is investing all of the major drug companies there, including Merck, and that's not to say they'll find any wrongdoing at Merck, but I have concerns that the Chinese government won't let a perfectly good scandal go to waste and will demand lower pricing for these drugs. So I think that could put some negative pressure on the amount of growth coming out of China in future quarters, but that's a problem for future quarters. Let's take a look at what were problems for this quarter. What didn't work for Merck in the second quarter?
Well, Singulair was the company's top-selling drug for a long time, but it lost exclusivity last year. And even though the patent expired last year, it's still feeling the effects this quarter. So sales were down 80%. Consumer health was also down about 10%, but if you look closely at the footnotes in the earnings press release and the conference call, that was due to the cancellation of some distribution agreements in China, and according to management, sales would have been up 4% in any case. So I have kind of a broader question for you, David, when it comes to consumer health and even Merck's animal health unit. Do you think it's time for Merck to start spinning off these divisions and focusing just on pharmaceuticals?
Well, I think that's a really good question, and I think it's a question that's on a lot of people's minds, investors, Wall Street analysts. We saw it brought up on the call again because you take a look at Pfizer, which we previously described as ripping itself apart. They spun out their animal health unit. They netted $2 billion on the IPO. They ended up doing a share swap for their remaining 80% stake. It canceled 400 million Pfizer shares, which is great for Pfizer investors. Zoetis, which is the animal health company's new name, it's a $15 billion market cap. Now, Merck's animal health business, obviously not the same size as Zoetis, but there is something to be had for spinning out some of these slower growing businesses, and Merck's was down slightly for the quarter. Zoetis was actually up about 4%. I believe Merck's was down about 1 or 2%. So roughly. Obviously, you don't want to be down, but it's not like there was tremendous gap in performance. So when you see something that's dragging down performance in a business where you might need to raise some cash, it prompts analysts to say, is this a case of diversification? Is it better to become a more streamlined company? And to that effect, Merck's management said, no, these are we believe these to be complementary businesses. They're consumer health as well, and they believe that they help diversify earnings, and it's complementary to that. So I don't think something's going to happen anytime soon. They did say they will continually evaluate their strategy going forward, but it's a real question going into some of the patent problems they have.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Actually, if you look at their consumer health division, it brought in about $500 million this quarter. That's typically what it brings in every quarter. And I think those sales are important to offset some of the patent expirations that we're about to talk about.
Yep. And I was looking at the patent expiration list for Merck, and
it's kind of scary.
It was actually a little shocking to me how comprehensive it was.
Propecia is one that already lost patent protection at the start of this year. That's the hair loss drug. It brought in $240 million last year, so we're not talking about a blockbuster on the scale of Singular, but that's still incremental revenue that's important, and it'll probably be lost. Sales dropped this quarter about 30%. But David, there are a lot of other drugs that are losing protection.
Yeah, I mean, 2014 is the big year.
So there's 6 that will lose patent protection. Many of them only bring in about $200 million a year. Nasonex is one, however. It brought in $1.3 billion in 2012. So when that goes off patent, that could potentially be a huge hit to their top line. Timodar is a brain cancer drug and brought in $900 million in 2012. That's another one that should face generic competition very quickly.
Mm-hmm. And when I took a look at it, not only do they have a lot in 2014, they have 13 total in 5 years. So, there may be a lot of what we call base hits, like, non-blockbuster drugs, but that incremental revenue does add up to a significant portion of their portfolio over time. And in 2017, they're losing Vytorin and Zetia, which is a big product for them. And another drug that jumped out at the page to me was Peg-Intron, which is their interferon, which is used in hepatitis C. And that's a division that I think is actually potentially at risk from competition even before that patent runs out.
Right. I mean, it's actually a cornerstone of their infectious disease segment right now, right?
Yeah, and infectious disease to me looks ripe for disruption, and I think that's a real problem. Victrellis is one of their hepatitis C drugs. It did $500 million in 2012 revenues. Peg-Intron did $600 million. They're used together, so really that's sort of a combo blockbuster product if you look at it. But Gilead has a product called Sofosbuvir, which is a paradigm shift in how we treat hepatitis C, and it's interferon free, it's all oral, and it could really hurt these cells. We've seen a competitor, Victrellis, which was a blockbuster, is really its sales are plummeting, and I think Victrellis and by extent Peg-Intron will struggle to maintain what they've been doing.
Yeah, what do you think about Icentris, which is the company's HIV product? Sales were up 4%, brought in $412 million. Is there some competition coming up in this space?
Well, there is, Max, and it's by a company investors may not know that well. It's called Vive Healthcare. You can't buy it individually, but it is actually a joint product, or joint company.
Joint venture.
Yeah, joint venture, thank you. Project is the word I was looking for, by Pfizer and GlaxoSmithKline. And they have a drug that is in phase 3. It's actually under FDA review. It had a phase 3 trial called Sailing, which I know you appreciate as a sailor, which went head-to-head with Icentris. Now, Icentris did $400 million in sales for the quarter. It's about a $1.6 billion drug. But unfortunately, and I have this right here, the Vive Healthcare product, which is a once-a-day product, had a 79% efficacy rate, which was better than what Icentris had. So, and Icentris is, of course, a 2-a-day drug. So you have a dosing advantage, you have an efficacy advantage, and this drug is under FDA review right now. It got a priority review, which is a 6-month review, and its PDUFA date is actually this coming Saturday. So I think we could get a decision anytime, but I think this Friday or next Monday are probably the likeliest dates. But that could be a real risk for Icentris, even if it doesn't maybe crash sales the way, say, a generic competition would. I still think it will really curb its growth.
Right. Let's move on to our last segment today, which are catalysts that Merck investors should watch out for. I'll start with two, David. I'll start with suvorexant and the BACE inhibitor they're developing for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. Now, suvorexant, unfortunately, was rejected by the FDA recently because of some safety issues at higher doses. I think Merck will probably file for approval first half of next year at a lower dose. However, I don't think this is going to be an immediate blockbuster. There are a lot of generic drugs already available in the insomnia space. So even though I think it'll get approved on the second time around, I'm not banking on this for a lot of growth in the future.
Merck seemed pretty confident about getting an approval the second time around. It was a little embarrassing that they went so high on the dosing end given some of the side effect issues and didn't have that 5 milligram dose ready for FDA review, which clearly that's what the agency wanted.
The second drug I'm watching is the BACE inhibitor that they're developing for the treatment of Alzheimer's disease. Now, there will be a safety review for the drug at the end of this year, and I'm watching this because Eli Lilly was developing a similar drug, and they stopped their clinical trial because of some safety issues. There were some abnormal liver tests. So Eli Lilly came out and said that they don't think this is a broader issue for the entire BACE inhibitor class.
And they were going to still focus on the class of drugs, but that their drug in particular it was the problem. So
right. So I'll be interested to see what kind of data that Merck comes out with.
And Merck hasn't had any safety issues with this drug to date. So you know, it is something investors I think need to keep an eye on, especially because any sort of working Alzheimer's drug would just be huge for the company. We took a look at that patent cliff. It's pretty extensive, and so to be able
there are very few treatments
for Alzheimer's.
Few effective treatments for Alzheimer's today.
And so to have a drug like that be successful and make it through the clinical trial process would be huge for Merck.
Yeah. Well, what are you watching, Dave?
Well, I'm watching two different things. One is their immuno-oncology program. They have lambrolizumab, has some non-small cell lung cancer data coming out in the fall, in October, I believe. And that's going to go head-to-head with Bristol-Myers Squibb's nivolumab, which has already produced really impressive data. It's considered a paradigm shift potentially to how we treat cancer. So, that actually, I think, out of everything, is probably the biggest short-term catalyst to Merck. If that data compares with Bristol's, I think shares could really skyrocket. But, it might be tough to be sort of a Me Too drug given so far Bristol's impressive results and safety data. So Merck investors really need to be watching to see how lambrolizumab, which is also known as 3475, turns out. That's a key driver for the company. And then farther out in 2014, they have this Improve It trial, which compares Vytorin to Zocor. Now, Zocor, like most statins, Lipitor being one, has gone generic. Vytorin is a combination of two of their drugs, Zetia and Zocor. But the problem is, Vytorin is better at lowering cholesterol levels, but is it lower at actually reducing negative cardiovascular events, which is really the whole point of taking some of these drugs. It's not just to lower cholesterol. Right. And this trial could show that it's not actually meaningfully better at lowering these cardiovascular events, which could really damage their Vytorin franchise. So that date in 2014, almost no news is good news. If it shows bad results, or if it gets beat by generic Zocor, or even if it's close, that won't be very good for Merck. But there you have it, investors. A deep dive on Merck's second quarter and everything you would want to know about the company. For Max Macaluso, I'm David Williamson. Thanks for watching, and Fool on.